Welcome to Resilience 3, powered by FEI Workforce Resilience, building resilient workforces for more than 40 years. It's a custom that goes back, well, nobody is really sure how far, but thousands of years at least. Handshakes are seen in Greek artwork as early as the 9th century BC. The social custom of shaking hands extends across cultures. Sociologists propose that shaking hands originated as a way of showing that no weapon was being held and that the greeter's intentions were peaceful. Regardless of how it began, a handshake serves many functions: a welcome, a gesture of trust, a reinforcing of social bonds. When we shake hands with someone, we trigger a release of the hormone oxytocin, which facilitates feelings of trust and connection. In many ways, handshakes are vital points of human contact, happening billions of times every day. Until 2020. Our earliest understanding of the coronavirus was that contact was the primary way the disease spread. The highly contagious nature of the virus meant that shaking hands could be a significant path of infection. So we stopped shaking hands. You might say it's a small price to pay for slowing the spread of a pandemic. Fair enough. We also started washing our hands a lot more, which is an undeniable improvement. But the loss of handshakes and other forms of human contact have left us feeling a sense of loss. Maybe it's a small price to pay, but as we consider coming back to the new world at work that is waiting for us, it's worth considering how all of these small prices may be adding up. Understanding for certain exactly what happened during 2020 is difficult enough. All those conspiracies aside, there is still considerable, valid debate over where and how the pandemic arose, not to mention an assortment of ideas about when it will be over. Understanding what it meant is something we'll be working on for many years. But in ways large and small, the rhythms and patterns of our daily lives have been altered and will stay that way for quite some time. Consider the well-established study of proxemics, the study of how people use and react to physical space, both personal, how much space do they take up, and social, distance from one another. We have long known that distances feel comfortable to us, or not, based on variables like age, development, culture, gender, mood, familiarity, relationships, etc. For example, at home we typically feel comfortable allowing our family members to get reasonably close to us. However, in the workplace, if a coworker were to get that close to us, it is much more likely to feel weird. And when a stranger stands close behind you, you are very likely to feel nervous. Most of us, by adulthood, have gotten very good at unconsciously navigating these personal and social spatial relationships without giving it a second thought. Until 2020. Suddenly, any distance less than 6 feet between people could provoke uncertainty, fear, anxiety, even hostility. The rules changed, seemingly overnight. Now a stroll around the block or a walk through a parking lot has taken on added stress. As we eye approaching strangers warily, our need for greater separation has caused some of us to give much wider berth to our fellow pedestrians while unconsciously holding our breath. Speaking of breath, many of us have now become surprisingly accustomed to covering the lower half of our face with some sort of a mask. Now, in situations when we would likely smile at a stranger as a social act of reassurance, nobody can see our smile beneath our mask. Again, we're doing this to try and protect others and keep people safe, but missing a huge element of nonverbal communication in the process. Not shaking hands, standing a little further apart, masking, these may not seem like such big things. But consider how many billions of daily points of human contact have been changed or completely lost all over the world. When we discussed what happened, we acknowledged there were significant gaps in our knowledge and even some disagreement about what had occurred. We are living through this mystery, adding chapters and collecting evidence as we go, and the story is not over yet. Making sense of the pandemic's impact on us, both individually and collectively, will take some time. Figuring out what it means, what it has meant, and what it will mean in the future, that will take years or maybe even decades. But this type of meaning-making is something we were born to do. In fact, many psychological theorists, Viktor Frankl for example, tell us that the primary motivation of human beings is to discover meaning in life. In another part of this course, we spend a lot of time talking about the impact of trauma on the way our brains work, and what we can do to build our resilience in the face of traumatic stress. Our understanding of those impacts is based on brain science that has emerged in recent decades. By now, the various impacts of trauma on the functioning of a human brain are well documented and based on data. In that sense, these impacts are nothing new. What is new is the way this trauma has affected literally all of us. Collective trauma on a global scale is pretty rare. In ways that manifest perhaps once in a generation, this pandemic is happening to everybody. Which is not to say that it is happening to everybody in exactly the same way. While statements of solidarity like "we're all in this together" try to convey the global reach of the pandemic, such statements sound like hollow platitudes to people who can't work from home and whose jobs, if they still have them, require them to continuously expose themselves and their loved ones to infection. While everyone may experience some negative psychological impacts, the greatest afflictions tend to fall on the most vulnerable. Lack of access to resources and adequate supports makes it worse. We know that some ethnic groups, particularly the Black and Hispanic populations, have suffered in greater proportion. We know that lower income and urban populations in general have suffered more cases of the disease in greater severity. And older people are far more likely to become extremely ill and die, or have lasting debilitating consequences. There are also correlations of severity and death to other diseases. So, experiencing this pandemic is something we're all doing together, but that does not mean we are having the same experience. Not only are we not all in the same boat, some of us don't even have a boat. As we return to work, that will be very important to appreciate as we interact with and support our team members. Everybody's experience has been different. Some people may have dealt with little more than some minor lifestyle annoyances. Others may have experienced a severe illness for themselves or loved ones, or even the death of someone they knew and loved. As we come back into the workplace, it will be more important than ever to understand the context of people's behavior. Learning even a little about somebody's experience of the pandemic can go a long way towards understanding their behaviors and perhaps any difficulties they may be having. Remember, you may be dealing with someone who is furloughed, isolated, or required to work in environments that could have placed themselves and their families in harm's way. These stresses are very real, but they will appear and affect us all in very different ways. Before this crisis, we might have called such an approach trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive. In the new world of work, it should become a standard procedure. This will require a degree of empathy and compassion that is not usually taught in business school. By now, we are probably all familiar in some fashion with the way public health officials have advised us during this crisis. They gave very practical advice and recommendations for changing our behavior, social distancing, masks, etc., to limit the spread of the illness. But behind all of this, we also heard the reminder that the disease is nothing to take lightly. Public health discussions about the impact of this crisis go much deeper than the symptoms of the disease itself. One public health expert went so far as to call the lockdown the largest psychological experiment ever conducted. As quarantine was instituted and dragged on, concerns about increases in depression, anxiety, and substance abuse also arose. Indeed, data gathered by private and public sources both indicate significant and sustained increases in symptoms of anxiety, depression, suicidality, and other symptoms of mental health issues at well above historical norms. These concerns have been greatly amplified by the financial stresses so many of us are under. And even if we were not directly stressed financially, worry about losing jobs is pervasive. Concerns went beyond the mental and behavioral health aspects. Concerns were widespread that people in general would be afraid to go to healthcare facilities, or perhaps would not be able to afford to go. Many untreated medical conditions would worsen, increasing cost and suffering in the long run. To what degree will these concerns be realized? We don't know that yet. But a recent study found that the pandemic resulted in an estimated 5.4 million Americans losing their health insurance between February and May, more than have ever lost coverage in a single year because of job losses. This makes it more likely that more health concerns will not receive the attention they require. So what we do know of what this pandemic has meant, at least to start with, is that we have all, to some extent or another, been traumatized. We also know that the many effects of this trauma, indeed the trauma itself, is ongoing. With the story still being written and its impact uncertain, it is understandable that we view the barriers to returning to work as enormous. In fact, describing it as a return seems like a vast oversimplification. Yet, there is reason for hope. From the beginning, some of us believed that this experience would bring us back to appreciating the things that give our lives meaning, whatever those may be. We believe that we will find opportunity in this crisis to slow down, regroup, and refocus. We allowed ourselves to consider that there is a reason to hope, and that on the other side of this, whenever that may arrive, we will find versions of ourselves that are stronger, kinder, and more resilient than we were before. To learn more, visit learning.resilience3.com.